Good. We're live on YouTube. I will call to order the Easton Reading Region 9 Joint Policy Committee at 9:02 a.m. on April 1st, 2022. Members in attendance, John Stinson and Christopher Parkin.
Good morning. I will call to order the Region 9 Policy Committee special meeting at 9:02 a.m. Members in attendance are Sarah Lieberger, Cheryl Graziano, and Kathy Thompson.
First item on the agenda is the approval of minutes for the Joint Policy Committee. We're just looking at the March 25th meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to approve? From Chris?
I will take myself off mute and then make that motion.
Thank you. Any objections or corrections? Hearing none, we'll consider the March 25th minutes approved by the Joint Policy Committee.
Great. And I'd like to review the March 24th minutes with the Region 9 Policy Committee.
So move to approve.
I had one comment
Sure.
under C, process for consideration of one policy book versus 3 individual. And just to clarify that my concern was regarding one book, not the book in general or a book in general. Or manual or book, as you stated.
There's C. I don't see a C in the minutes.
This is in we had a Region 9 meeting on the 24th.
Got it.
Okay, great. Kathy, I will make that update and I'll review with you before I send it in.
Thanks.
And I'll amend my motion to approve as amended. So you want to table the vote, so I'm not sure if you want to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Need a second and vote, or we just assume it's unanimous as amended?
I think for minutes, it's essentially you're working on it until everyone agrees. And so the motion can take the form of, any additional objections or corrections. If none, we consider them approved.
Yeah. Yep. Sarah and Kathy, you're okay with that, right?
Unanimous? Mhm.
Yes.
Okay.
Great.
Okay. And was that also for the March 25th for the Region 9? No. Okay.
I'll abstain from the 25th because I wasn't in attendance.
Motion to approve Region 9, March 25th minutes.
Second.
And then you could ask for corrections.
Do we have any corrections to those minutes?
I did not.
None on my end. Okay, the minutes have been approved. And it
Excellent.
is unanimous for March 25th.
So that takes us to public comment. Let me just double check. No members of the public being present. We'll move on to committee member comment. Any comment from committee members? Okay. Hearing none, we'll move on to discussion and possible action, model policy review process. Do we have anything specific to the process this week? Okay. Moving on to the actual review. We have the 1000 through the 4000 series. So we have the ability to go back if we need to. I'm going to share my screen just to track this process. And we left off here in the 1000 series on use of school facilities. I think we had actually looked at that one and flagged it for additional review, both in terms of joint and Region 9. Good. Do we need to go back to the school facilities and sort of continue the discussion there, or are we good to move on to visitors?
It feels like we're going through this and flagging things, and then there's going to be a second round where we go through the flags to summarize what the requests are.
Yeah,
It feels like it's going, for better or for worse.
yeah, and I think a little bit the flag was intended to say we have questions that we think we need advice of council on. So to consolidate the number of times where we're saying, hey, let's bring in Gwen or whoever's going to be the representative from Shipman.
Right.
Yep.
I guess from a timeline perspective, is the intent to try to get through everything and then go through the flags, or stop at some point and review the flags for the first half to get that request out to Gwen or whatever it is, so that we're not waiting to send a big list?
I don't know for sure. I thought that we were favoring let's collect all the flags.
Okay.
If we end up flagging a ton of policies, it may be that we need to break it up. And if we don't, then maybe we can do it all in one shot.
Let's keep trucking then.
Yep. All right. So we'll jump into visitors. I have linked everything sort of in the past and through our next round. So everything that we would be reviewing for next week as well.
That was tremendously helpful.
Good. It definitely makes it a lot easier to navigate. So I think a couple of notes that we see here. So Kathy tagged that there's no existing Region 9 policy found. And then, just sort of alluding to the fact that we want some language that helps us to just sort of cover all the sort of principal versus head of school that might be.
Yes, and I made these comments before we had our discussion, so.
Good. All right, then. So sorry, I need to move this. There we go.
Just clarifying that from page 2 on his regs that we would be dropping.
Correct. Yeah, and it's I think we're going to get into some questions later. Well, maybe not today, but as we continue through the policies, where there is language in policy that refers to the reg, and it can become a catch-22 if board member sort of acceptance of the policy is somewhat dependent upon what the regulation is. So we may need to say, hey, are we comfortable with the regulation that's been submitted here? Can we adopt that regulation on the part of the administration, and then sort of come back and say, this is what that is referring to? But
I think it would be my presumption, without knowing more, based on comments that Dr. McKinnon's made before, that in the absence of extenuating circumstances, the administration is going to defer to the Shipman regs too, and overwhelmingly adopt them.
Yeah. And that would definitely make the process easier. Okay, good. No need to flag visitors. Tell me if I'm wrong on that. We're moving on to volunteers. Let's see. So no Region 9 policy found. That's an interesting question. I think that invention convention is only happening, at least today, at the elementary school level. You know what? That's not entirely true, because I think in Reading they started doing it at the middle school level. Is that true, Chris?
That sounds right. I mean, COVID has changed so many things.
Right. Yeah, I think. I mean, it's complicated. Invention convention is actually doing sort of first round sort of state judging online now. I'm judging one of the one of the rounds, and I know that you're not talking about that, right? You're questioning in the school. Is that right?
I'm just questioning because it says in any capacity.
Yeah.
So for example, we just did the invention convention at Samuel Staples,
right,
and there's probably similar things like that at all the schools at some point. And is that considered a volunteer because it's outside of their role? It's very picky, but I just raise it.
Is it?
I view this in terms of collective bargaining and contracts.
Yeah.
And a concern about, I'm a teacher and I want to run the, fire safety club.
Yep.
And there's no money in the budget for it, but I want to do it anyway. So I'm going to volunteer for it. And then that creates its own complication because there are contractual obligations around what we're paying for, what we're not paying for.
Stipends
and it creates all kinds of gray areas. And so that's why I assume that that's why that was in there, but I don't know.
But the invention convention was done during school hours, right? I mean, the teachers involved with it, I'm assuming it was still the fourth grade teachers. They were doing that as a part of a unit that was, sort of, as a part of their science unit, right?
They're being paid anyway.
Yeah, but it's during the day they're being paid. My question, I think about the many activities that take place at RES on weekends that often include teachers running a table or
international festival running, singing, and the music teacher coming to help the third grade chorus at something like that.
Stephanie, in those instances, does each employee have to solicit some kind of approval, or just so there is no confusion around that it's not part of the collective bargaining agreement?
No, not currently. I mean, currently it's really the PTA sponsors events, and then the teachers initiate the process. I mean, they offer to participate. So it's not as if there's any expectation on the part of the administration that the teachers will participate, but they certainly do. So I'm a little confused by this.
There is an exception here approved by the superintendent or designee. So I wonder.
It implies an activity that doesn't occur. So now if we have all these teachers that volunteer, which is awesome, then they'll have to go to some head of school. Yeah. And it seems excessive. But again, to Chris's point, we don't want to run afoul of the collective bargaining agreement.
And what happens if they don't in a certain circumstance? It's, every year I volunteered for the invention convention. I forgot to do it this year. I didn't get the sign off.
Right.
I mean, what's the penalty or remedy? I don't know. So the whole, there are questions.
I think we flag that one, and we gotta track down some more info on that. I do want to go back up. You've tagged this in the column about policy.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure.
Just one more question about the employees. For example, an employee who has a child in the school.
Right.
I also volunteer on behalf of their child.
Yep.
And is that prohibited, or would they need an exception?
Right. Yeah, that seems silly, right? You're not waiving your rights to be a parent. So, okay. We'll clear this one because this fits the sort of other stuff. We'll leave these two because that's sort of the core of what we want to drill in on. Done with volunteers.
I had a general comment throughout, and I just noticed some of it, and it's in some of the ones we reviewed. Mm-hmm. There's wording superintendent and or his, her designee. Mm-hmm. I don't know statutorily like what the appropriate, I kind of flagged the his, her in some of the policies is there. So I'm not sure with respect to discrimination or what kind of state laws that we shouldn't be using those pronouns. So again, it's all over the place. So I will presume that, that's just kind of a general question. I didn't flag all of them, but it's a general question I had for Shipman.
Yeah, and I think we can bring that as a part of the sort of preface conversation.
Yep.
And, say, can we just have some language that we agree on about head of school, about pronouns, about, et cetera.
You probably try to do your best to do what you can within the policies, but include catch-all crosswalk language at the beginning, because you're just not going to catch them all.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'll leave this comment here to make sure that it comes up when we can come back there. We'll leave the EDD so that we're tagging there. And then we've got reg, which is understood. Records custodian. Yeah, that's a really good question. Is that a new role? Shall designate a records custodian.
It's somebody who stuck with that as one of the hats that they wear.
Yeah, I think it's a new hat for an existing person, right? Okay.
And it might be the network administrator or the director of technology, unfortunately.
Right. So I'll clear our reg tag because we understand that one, but I think this one is sort of a cousin of EDD, and make sure that we remember that and come back. Good. Retention of electronic. Good. Assuming this is tagged right in the spreadsheet. Leaving the EDD.
And here's a way to, and this is an example of how they did it with no pronouns whatsoever.
Yeah.
The superintendent or designee shall.
Right. Right. It's not,
Yep.
doesn't require a huge amount of creativity to get there. Oh, I see. So question here from Kathy is as to whether or not this is accurate for what Region 9 is doing.
Well, I guess for anybody, really, I don't know.
Right. Is this consistent with our existing practice? I don't know if Stephanie knows or if this is really a question for Sarah. This is about password systems designated to simply to sort of provide system security from unauthorized users, not to provide privacy.
Yeah, I would have to check on that. I don't
Okay.
want to state definitively.
Well, and I mean, yeah. Okay, so we'll leave that one.
It strikes me as being an under promise, which is the kind of thing that we'd be shooting for here. We make no guarantees that we're preventing anybody else from getting into this or providing privacy.
Right.
Because we have no obligation to provide that privacy. You are now on notice that we're not taking.
Right.
You may get privacy from this, but we're not guaranteeing it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so then maybe we don't need to track that down.
Yeah, I think you can clear it.
Yeah, I think that's a good perspective, Chris. I think that makes sense. Oh, yeah. Anyone else notice this one? I think it's asking for, it's a bit of a bear.
That's state law.
Right. It's a really bad law. Now, I'm going to say, as I'm reading through these regulations, through the policies, I'm struck by how often it's like, oh wow, that's a really thoughtful law. Like that they've dealt with a complex issue in a really smart way. This one is sort of separating this set of duties. So it's like, okay, go over here to find, and it's sort of abstracted from, the core of where you're going to find what the responsibilities are, which makes it a moving target that's just like an ongoing thing. We have to go look and sort of find, is this the right?
I mean, what's frustrating is that when Shipman promulgated this policy and the one we just looked at,
Yep.
They didn't take the time to say in this one, the records custodian shall be responsible for this, because the records custodian should have the responsibility for both of these things.
Yeah.
And the way this is written, they don't.
Right.
Because nobody has responsibility for this according to this policy except the superintendent or designee,
Right.
which ought to be that defined term that existed in the previous policy.
Well, it may be a function of the statute that it does require it in the sort of physical records. It doesn't require in the sort of digital records, and it may be that
it's all based on the state library's retention schedule.
Right, but I could imagine a sort of thoughtful lawmaker saying, the people
you can imagine a thoughtful lawmaker.
Come on, there's some good stuff in here. I could imagine a thoughtful lawmaker saying that an electronics record may be more difficult for someone who's already sitting as the sort of the retention czar, who's dealing with books and sort of boxes of papers. They may not have the same skill set necessary to navigate the digital version of that.
But they should still be the person who is in charge of making sure that the person with the technical skill set is doing that, and they should be giving that direction.
Sure. Yeah.
But the person in charge of the books can still tell the person in IT to comply. Here's what this means, and here's what this means.
Yes-ish. I've seen that in practice where you have someone who's in charge of a offline process become the sort of person in charge of the people who do the digital version of the process, and it can lead to disaster where they're instructing them to do certain things that just don't make sense and are incredibly.
Luckily, we don't have enough people in our organization to start having these conversations.
Correct.
We're really talking about the same person in all likelihood. So
we can move on. Okay. Good, and then we're at reg, which will clear the standard reg flag. Delete tab.
What did I have?
Oh,
here?
I see. It's a formatting thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll leave that because this is something that we're going to want to bring up with shipmen. Like if we're finding typos and things for them, maybe we can get a discount on next year's.
Yeah, there are a couple ones that I actually changed. This is only my earlier review one, so I just flagged it. But
Yeah,
some of
better
them
to
I
flag.
actually changed.
Yeah, better to flag so that we're consistent wherever possible. Trying to keep it as written is good, or even if it needs to be corrected, getting shipmen to correct it in their source so that we're still in sync. All right. Yep. Good. We now go to uniform treatment of recruiters. Good. Assuming this is tagged in the spreadsheet, Kathy?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, so I think maybe this needs to be in the preface, or somewhere else we can say sort of guidance department, career center. Like these terms are interchangeable. I believe EDD, direct from statute. Can we clear that, Chris?
This is explanatory in as much as this list of obligations is exactly word for word from the statute. And Kathy asked some questions about physical and email address and whatever. This is
I see.
word for word from the statute.
Oh, okay. All right. Very good.
In terms of the guidance department, the department is actually called the counseling department. The career center is the place, but the department is counseling. Guidance is sort of an older term for the same group of people.
Counseling department.
Counseling. Yep. Counseling department.
Just
It's SEL. You're thinking CIL, aren't you?
Or yes.
I can see your brain. You're like,
I'm like,
and early.
The first rule of the policy committee is nobody criticizes the person typing live.
That's right.
Agreed.
All right, direct from statute. Okay, so we can clear this as well as the physical email and sort of the other questions that were. Is that correct, Kathy and Chris?
Right. As far as I'm concerned, I mean, we're welcome to create additional restrictions. I would just caution against it.
It's if everybody's fine with it, I'm fine. It was just a question if it mattered.
Like why? Yeah, like why they were calling that out.
I guess if Shipman is okay with it, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, and I think the reason that they were calling it out in this way is because they're lifting the language directly from the statute.
Yeah, if you read 10.221B, it's basically verbatim that paragraph.
Yeah, cool.
So I guess to that point, is there a requirement for stuff to be in paper, like not email, or I guess just only the physical, identifying information of the student? And it's more of a kind of a question, nothing necessarily with the change, because if it's coming right out of the statute, I'm just curious why they wouldn't mention email, but it's fine.
My guess is 10.221B hasn't been amended in a long time.
Okay, that makes sense.
So it is a question because everybody uses email now, and if it potentially could be an issue.
Yeah.
Can you put my question? Can you reinstate my comment?
Yeah.
Do you mind?
Yep. Yeah, and I think it becomes a. Can I reinstate? I think I can go here.
So
cool. Look at that.
So what's the concern? Because the policy does not require the disclosure of email addresses. Are we saying that the policy should require the disclosure of email addresses to recruiters?
Well, it is. I guess my question is, it isn't clear if it is an email or a physical address. And I think in today's like common usage of address, someone could interpret that to mean email versus their home, their physical address.
I see.
So for example, if they share an email address and a parent says, I didn't give permission for you to give my child's email address. Now they're getting emails versus I got a letter in my mailbox or my PO box.
And so but then I guess what we'd be looking for from Shipman is an interpretation of the law as to, does this mean physical address or does this mean email? And I think they're going to say this means physical address because the statute was, and you can actually, when you go look up the statutes, there are versions of the Connecticut website where you find those statutes that will show you, here's the previous version of the law and the previous version. And it kind of gives you a really nice tracking of how it evolved and what was changed. And so I suspect that this is going to be really firmly physical. And so then the question is, can you amend this? Can you amend your policy shipment to say physical address so that there's clarity? That all make
Physical
sense?
address would be part of public information, right? So I think we can look at FERPA too, to look at what's considered public information.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably a little bit broader than people might think.
Yeah, I just think,
This statute is from 1984, by the way.
yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yep. And so it's not a function of the text was ambiguous when it was written. It's that the world has changed and it has become ambiguous.
And so there's the reference within that, where did this go? The reference within the statute to address calls back to the thing just logged me out. Calls back to a definition section in the same statute, which has just crashed on me, but it looks like electronic mail address is defined separately in that section as its own term, which would tell me that there's no problem in adding physical if we wanted to make sure that there was clarity. But anybody interpreting this policy from a legal perspective would say that it's not applied to email addresses.
Okay. All right, good. So we'll check in with Shipman on that, which I think we're going to
just to clarify. I don't know why we would check with Shipman about whether we have to add an email address, because then it's just something else that we are responsible to do.
No, that's not the proposal. So the proposal is, can we ask that they provide specificity, that the intent is physical address, so that a reader of the policy does not confuse it and assume that it could mean email address. So it's simply to specify and make clear what we believe the sort of the original statute was requiring, which was sort of physical address, just saying physical address because the world has changed and address can mean more than physical address.
Okay, but then why, if we're talking about the current world, I don't say to you, John, can I have your email address? I say, can I have your email? So if email's not in there, then it's not in there.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I don't know that we can account for every variation that sort of people use as shorthand.
I'm super comfortable. I'm super comfortable that this policy means physical address.
This is just an example of us getting a little bit, we're getting kind of tied down here a little bit, right? So we can't flag everything because we're just going to be flagging everything. So I don't know what I'm trying to say here, other than, keep it simple. We just need to keep this simple.
Agreed.
Yes, please.
When I imagine the conversation with Shipman, I imagine a digest of each one of these things, a summary that we've prepared for them that says, hey, on this one, question about this. And that should be a 1 minute conversation in some cases. And in other cases, it's a more sort of complex conversation. But on that one, it might even just be that we say, hey, this is something to pay attention to in the policies overall, and something that Shipman might want to consider as they look at the sort of all of their policies, providing specificity where terminology may have taken on new meaning.
Okay.
Right. So it could just be a recommendation to them that they say, great, thanks for the idea. moving on.
I think Shipman sometimes writes the policy as it relates to a statute. And if the statute hasn't changed in a while, I don't think Shipman does that work. I think that's the legislature's responsibility to update the statute, and then Shipman would update the policy.
Yeah.
In that instance, Jason, do you think then that Shipman's recommendation would be just leave it the way it is?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, they wouldn't. So from going back to your comment about, is there any action here, or the potential action that we would have would be nothing, and just make a presumption that we're talking about physical.
I think the question for Shipman is there a problem if we add the word physical or mailing in front of address?
Well,
and if they say no, then you do it. And if they say yes, because it's better to track directly with the statute in case anything changes in the statutes, then you just leave it alone.
Yeah.
And
I don't think there's an issue either way.
I agree. And the way that I would pose it is, can you consider this phenomenon? Because it's going to be more than just the word address. There are other words that have taken on new meaning in today's world, right? And having them be mindful of that and maybe even engage in some kind of review on their own, not on our behalf, but for their policy service, to make sure their policies are as high quality as possible. Specificity where words have taken on new meaning kind of matters. So I don't think we have to continue to harp on it. Okay. Budget procedures and line item transfers. All the fun stuff.
3,000.
I have a suspicion we could spend the balance of our time on those.
And Kathy, I'm assuming you've tagged this?
Yes.
Good. Okay. EDD would keep so that we can come back and grab it later. Departure from custom. I think that's what you mean when you say we can spend the balance of our time.
There's a couple of threshold issues here. There's the what do we do? There's the what do we want to do? And there's the what opportunity is there to conform this into a single statute or a single policy that within it calls out the distinctions between local and regional boards of education, so that we don't have a divergence between the three boards going forward with respect to what is ultimately an often cited, misunderstood, and lamented policy about when the administration needs to seek transfer authority. And I think if it's possible, it's super helpful to make sure that all three boards are aligned as to what those obligations are, because it's caused fights before.
And where this comes into where we would actually have fights about it is when we're talking about transfers in central office, right? Because if Region 9 is doing transfers and they want to do their transfers in a certain way, they can do that. I think in central office we have a sort of shared.
And there's a they can do that, but there's also, from a practical perspective, if one of the three boards says everything over $1 needs a motion,
right,
it's throwing the other two boards out of administrative time because they're dealing with nonsense. And so there has to be sort of the closer we can get to procedural parity, the more administrator time is spent on substantively important things.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Okay. So what do we think the right sort of next step is here? Is this where we are asking Shipman, basically saying to Shipman, hey, we're going to do a bunch of rewriting here? Or are we going to ask them to recommend something to us?
I mean, we could lay out what the current practices are, right? Region 9, I think, is 5,000, right? And then writing in Easton. And then there's always been this ambiguity with respect to central office. And I do remember the many discussions over the years. Wait a minute, we moved that line up, nobody knew about it. And then it gets into then we go down the rabbit hole saying, well, I want to approve it this. So I mean, it's to me just a matter of here's our current practice. What would Shipman recommend to reduce administrative burden and have transparency with respect to central office expenses? There aren't a lot of transfers within central office line items, quite frankly, but what would they recommend to reduce administrative burden and still be compliant with this? I mean, this is very high level to me, and I had a ton of questions reading this and I saw all of the flags. I'm like, oh, I have the same questions. So, but that's kind of where they need, Jason, maybe you have a view here.
Yeah, this is one of the policies that we just tabled that we didn't change from the old policy and we didn't adopt as the new policy. It just needed a lot more time to talk about. So we kind of took it off the table. We didn't change the current policies because we realized it would kind of gum up the works and really slow us down from the bulk of the work.
I would be totally happy passing on this entirely and having a thoughtful conversation in isolation on this and possibly the purchasing policy for similar reasons.
These policies are pretty complex and they require a lot of time, and so we just kind of punted and came back.
I'd really like, Jason, your perspective after a little bit more time in the chair to understand the nuts and bolts of what you see from your perspective and how we can adopt policy that is helpful both ways, from a transparency perspective and an operational perspective. Like, for example, one of the elephants in the room here is that the categories that are enumerated on this policy are right out of the statute about transfers. But then we have our own budget category called central office, which lumps several of these together. And that's where I think some of the pressure has come before of, hey, you moved out of supplies to pay staff at central office. You can't do that without a transfer. Wait, but maybe I can, because in our budget, it's all under this separate category, but it's a different category that's theoretically other in here, even though it incorporates other things. So there's a bespoke element of this to make sure we get everyone on the same page. So I would just pass and revisit possibly at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Any objection to that approach on this?
No, that sounds reasonable.
It sounds like right. And so I want to think about how we indicate that that, it's like flagging because we're not going to do it. So maybe I think
highlight it in orange or red as sort of skipped.
Yeah, I like that.
What about the recommendations column, the ER9, though? Don't we have an option in there in the drop?
We do. We absolutely do.
Independent review or postponed review.
We have a punt option there.
I think it's,
or maybe we should add one.
I think we either call it reject or revise. Yeah. Do we say revise?
Sure.
Yeah.
Is
I
that
would
as
call it
close?
something associated with it too, just to make sure that we know that this is a complete punt.
Yeah. Let's say. Good. Okay. And I think
So Dr. McKenna, in your past experience, this was not one of the policies that was adopted and the current policies revoked. This was held in place and not replaced until further discussion took place.
Yes, that was correct. Part of the reason was that we revised, one of the first policies I revised was related to business procedures and the amount that we could transfer, the amount that we needed to bid, the amount that we needed to go to RFP. We kind of revised our whole business suite of policies. And so they were pretty much up to date within the last few months. And so we wanted to keep them because we did work on it. But we also wanted to table this because we wanted to incorporate the shipment change plus the work that we had recently completed. So it was a complete table. It was too dense to change within the suite of, the 80% that we're adopting versus what we're tabling and so on.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on to code of conduct for child nutrition program.
This is a question. Is a code of conduct a policy?
My guess, and I haven't looked at this, is that something in the Code of Federal Regulations requires this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's this citation that says in compliance with 2 CFR 200.318.
So is that
I agree that it's weird that it's styled this way instead of just a policy.
Because there were one or two others I noticed were codes versus policies. It's just a question.
So it may be that the law states XYZs, sort of school districts will have a code of conduct, a model code of conduct policy, or something like that. So, it has it plays the same role as policy in that it spells out how we're going to adhere to the law.
I pulled up the corresponding CFR 200-318, and it's in the context of overall what looks like federal regulations for
Mhm.
procurement. And it looks like it's kind of copy pasted right out of that,
Yeah.
is this a regulation? Yeah, federal regulation. And looks like it's federal, not.
Yeah.
Right. And I think where they're pulling it from is a non-federal entity must maintain written standards of conduct covering conflicts of interest and et cetera.
Right.
I think what you could probably do is style it as policy on standards of conduct for school lunch program.
Yeah.
To avoid any sort of confusion, but it's all stylistic.
Right. So just looking, so board duty is EDD tag. We can clear the styled comment, yes, as well as the code of conduct considered a policy, or do we want to bring that to shipment?
I don't think it's worth creating additional friction.
Okay. Yeah, Kathy, you agree?
If we're gonna include it, ultimately it doesn't matter policy versus code of conduct if we all agree we want to have it. So
Right.
yes.
Yeah, and I think the one place where we may ask the question to shipment is this the same as policy in that we need it because it sort of corresponds with the law? And I think the answer is going to be yes, but we could just ask that question. I also have questions about, and so what our process is for any of our bracketed sections, especially where we have optionality.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So then, it feels to me that dictates a conversation with shipment that could be as simple as, is it your recommendation that we apply this optional language? What are the implications of it? Do we agree with that?
I think for the most part, we can use our judgment on the optional language, and they're going to say that it's your discretion, which is why we put it in there.
Which is why they wrote it this way in the first place. Then do we want to make a determination right now about
in this instance? I think I would pass because I'd rather not create additional handcuffs if we don't need to.
I agree.
Any objection to is not to include?
Yeah, I would strike that from the recommended policy.
Anyone? Okay. All right, good. That'll take us to our next disposal of obsolete surplus equipment and materials.
There's two versions here.
Right.
So
Right.
I just skipped down to the regional version.
Right. This is another one where we want to consider the extent to which we can align these, because ultimately I believe that the difference is that statute requires a local board of education to give some sort of deference to the municipality with respect to their right of first refusal on some of these things. We could conform this so that it all aligns with the local version and constrain Region 9 to give right of first refusal to both towns. Or we could not contain that restraint, but say that with respect to Easton and Reading, they shall give the respective town right of first refusal.
I prefer the latter.
So basically use the regional version and just add in a little language that's saying with respect to Easton Reading?
Yeah.
Or use the local version, but preface the language about
right. And I think Cheryl was saying she prefers use the regional and just
no. I just think the courtesy. The relationship between the regional board and the boards of finance and the towns are with respect to sharing the budget and any kind of information. It's a courtesy, and also because we assess at that level. But to bake it into some kind of implicit approval, that's the preference there. Is I don't want to handcuff the region 9 for that. Not that it would, but that's why I would want that clarity.
Well, I don't think that the towns need to approve anything here in as much as that if you're trying to unload something, you would sell it to them first or give it to them first
No.
before you unloaded it, so
Yeah.
that the towns could get the benefit of the old computers or whatever it is.
Okay.
Just
Yep.
in walking through our schools, and actually in walking through our schools this week, we were, Chris, we were down in the basement, and we found, I think it was chicken wire, right? It was something really random. And there's so much junk in our storage areas, in our spaces, that I almost feel like we could say something like no obsolete or surplus equipment or material with a value of X shall be discarded because we have stained yellow paper that no one's going to want. We have random pieces of chicken wire. We have chairs with broken legs.
Right. What's the difference between surplus equipment and valueless junk?
Right.
Exactly. And there's so much stuff that we need to discard, and we almost need to streamline that decision-making process and to offer things of value to our community, which is the spirit of this policy. But at the same time, there are things that just clearly are junk that we need to get rid of.
Well, I guess I read this as not junk. To me, I read this as a textbook that might be now obsolete because there are 10 versions ahead versus a chair with broken legs. That doesn't seem obsolete or surplus. Is the concern that a chair with broken legs you couldn't just throw it in the dumpster?
Or a desk, right? Or a conference room table or something like that. We were at the senior center for the Board of Finance cut session this last Tuesday for the Easton board, and they had a conference room table in there that had been donated, and it was a great conference room table. I imagine that kind of thing could happen. I understand sort of what you're saying, Dr. McKinnon, and I think that's probably right. Overall, though, I'm confused here. Like, where's the statute?
There isn't one. This is purely an operational policy.
And what are we doing? Right? Like, if our towns require this, then okay. But if it doesn't, it feels like you skipped this one.
There exists a policy now on this topic that is substantially similar.
Huh.
I think if you look at the top, it's talking about there may be policies on asset deletion in the town charter.
Yeah, right.
No charters.
There aren't? Not in Reading.
Neither town has a charter.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Then I'm a little confused. This seems out of step with existing, and so then there could be a question about existing policy and sort of the retention of existing policy, but recommended from shipment, I'm confused why this is here.
So Chris, you mentioned there's no charter for either town, but does either town have policies that speak,
that's different. A town policy wouldn't be binding upon the schools. A town ordinance theoretically could be, but there is no ordinance that would address this to my knowledge.
Got it.
I thought the intent of this was that at the end of the year, for example, there's piles of reading books that the second grade teacher isn't going to use. And she would say, in assuming positive intent here, oh, I'm going to give those to my child's nursery school, which then is really kind of a personal decision and somebody else could say, well, I wanted them for mine. I thought that was the intent of this, to put some policy in place so that didn't happen, so that everybody felt like it was transparent.
So the way where I see this coming from, my dad was a teacher and ran an alternative school, and he would talk about at the end of the year teachers taking boxes of unopened manila folders and just throwing them right in the trash, and it's like, what are you doing? And I think that I feel like this policy probably stemmed from people sort of recognizing that kind of waste and saying, like, that's not okay. You got to at least offer it to the town first. You got to, sort of try to sort of sell perfectly good goods.
Here's one: computer equipment.
Yeah.
Obsolete computer equipment. Just again, it's we do replace our fleet across all 3 districts on a regular basis, but then I feel like something's needed, as opposed to there's no statute. Why do we need it?
Yeah. Okay.
But at the same token, we don't want to handcuff the people in the buildings, and now there's something $50 and they have to go to whoever they have to go to throw it out. Or to sell it, or we could definitely go down a rabbit hole where every single thing in all the buildings will need some kind of approval from a bunch of volunteers who are not there every day. Right. So I think there's a balance that we can strike here.
I think you want to enable the administration to not become subjects of hoarders on television,
right?
But you also want to make sure that when the 6-year-old iPad is being replaced with a new iPad, but still has some value to somebody.
Useful life. Yep.
That it's either being used in the community for some value, or it's being sold, for some, benefit also. So I can recall in Region 9 sort of public sales of computers in the past couple of years when there was an upgrade. And I think that makes all the sense in the world. But the question is, how do you define it? What sort of thresholds do you put in it? What sort of guardrails do you put? Do you just make the policy that the administration shall develop regulations to ensure that anything of value is, either put to use to a, nonprofit or community organization, or sold, pursuant to regulations promulgated by the administration?
I think for 2 reasons: the sort of deep discussion we're having now, plus what Dr. McKinnon had suggested as a change, that is like, can we just at least put in some dollar value?
Yeah.
I don't like this policy as written.
I think we tag this one, and because it doesn't have specific basis in statute, I think we tag this one as revise.
Yeah.
And I went back to the CAVE statute that we've adopted in Reading that is substantially similar, and looked at its legal references, and its legal references are extremely high level. Duties of boards of education, how they control the school, and powers of school districts, which basically say school district can buy stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
We need this policy. I think it's good practice to protect taxpayers' investment and to ensure that we have credibility, that we're not throwing things away. I would like to take a stab at this, because I think that we have so much stuff, and some of it's not needed, that it actually impedes efficient learning and learning spaces. And our learning spaces could be far more effective and inviting and welcoming to students and staff. That we need a plan here, and we need to do something quickly, because I've only been in the district since September, but when I walked through certain schools, not all schools, but certain schools, I noticed ways in which we need to clean, organize, and be more efficient with our furniture, our belongings, just the stuff that we have in hallways and spaces. I think we can do much better.
I think we should, at the end of the school year, drag all of that stuff out into the parking lot, notice a tag sale, basically. Invite, and I'm more serious about this than I'm joking.
I like that.
And invite community groups, other schools, daycares, whatever it is, to come and purchase stuff at a discount. And at the end of the day, whatever is not taken is donated pursuant to policy and a public notice as to what it is we're doing.
Yeah. I like that. And the only way I would amend it is say it's a sort of tag sale / bonfire at the end of the day. Right. We can talk through the details.
Junk luggers come at 4. And
All right. Good.
Okay.
That takes us to, and just noticing the time, we have 4 minutes. Do we want to jump into the next one, or do we want to wrap?
What's the next one?
Gifts, grants.
I think that's a short one.
Okay. Yeah. 2 pages. Yeah. Good. Okay, we have EDD, head of school. Sarah, okay to clear this
Yep,
as the
yep.
sort of general tag?
Yeah, this is great.
Must, I think they mean only the super may. So we think maybe there's a correction that's necessary here, Chris?
The super shall inform the Board of Education of a gift more than that. Right, now I'm waiting for my version to come up. Where is my comment? What page?
Right here. It says schools must accept.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, I don't know why the superintendent would be required to accept gifts, as opposed to giving some discretion to decline the gifts. Because if a gift meets the criteria, like we're going to accept a piano that's worth $5,000, but it's coming from the Skokie, Illinois Nazis.
Right.
Maybe we don't want to accept that donation.
Right.
And I want to create a little bit of like discretion. I don't know.
But
Yeah,
I think that could be the criteria established by the administrative regulations, right? Could say, barring donations from hate groups or whatever.
Yeah, there was a real example in Region 9 a couple of years ago where we had a grant that was offered to us from like electronic cigarette company.
Yeah,
and we said no for that reason, but
I would definitely change it to may. Must doesn't make any sense. And by the way, we do actually, there was a gift recently where I actually asked my secretary to do research on that particular person and to make sure that this person was, just to make sure, kind of like your example, Chris, right? Just to make sure that this person is someone we want to be in business with.
Yeah.
I mean, what I might do is say may, and then to provide additional sort of guardrails from the board side, say that the superintendent shall advise the board or the board chairs of any gifts that were declined, so that there's at least some, knowledge. Hey, just so you know, the e-cigarette people offered me some money and I said no. Okay, thank you.
No. Okay.
I don't know.
Kathy, okay to clear the school, not schools? Yep. Okay.
Same on my end.
Yep. Good. And I think these questions of may, is that something we put in front of Shipman? Right, like edits to the policy to say may. Do we need to ask about that, or are they?
If we're talking about a punch list, then the simple question is there anything wrong with turning this?
Exactly. That's the way that I think about these tags. Is most of the time it's just a simple, quick question, good, next thing, and then there are a few places where the law is tricky. So okay, so we'll leave those, and then we'll tag this one, and then we will. I think probably call it a day. I think we made good progress, and I actually think our pace. We'll see. We'll see if we can catch up and hit our targets over the next few weeks. So, all right, good. I look for committee member comment.
Given that April vacation is coming up, so we'll lose a week. Is there any appetite at all for adding a special meeting, or meet for 2 hours?
Yeah.
So we keep the pace going?
I would appreciate that. I think a 2-hour evening meeting one of these nights would allow us to sort of catch up and really dig in, and may even allow some of our board members to attend and sort of observe the process, which could be helpful to the sort of next step of conversations.
Can you just extend that from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m.?
Mm-hmm.
Right, next week.
We can. I think Sarah has a conflict next week.
I can be there. I can be there in the morning next week. Making it longer isn't going to work.
Making next week's longer is a little tough because it's a half day of school.
And then are we still meeting on the 15th or no?
I think that was skipped on our schedule, but it's
right.
Good Friday.
I think that's right.
So it's on the 8th, and then we're back on the 22nd.
Mm-hmm.
So do we want to shoot for an evening? And now we're doing discussion.
I'm
I think
hesitant to
let's
lock
do
in
this.
meetings in the middle of budget.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about the 22nd as a longer session
Yeah,
in the morning?
Yes.
I could make
Yeah.
that works for me.
Yeah, that could work.
Yes.
Okay. Good.
Works.
All right. Any additional board member comment? Committee member
Did
comment?
we skip over administrative updates? I thought that might be
Oh, apologies.
B.
Sorry, I didn't. I didn't have administrative updates on the agenda.
Oh, okay.
On the agenda I was looking at least.
I saw, well, in the calendar invite that Cindy had sent on March 30th at 3:07,
Yep.
just for referencing your emails.
Yep.
She has it in there,
Interesting.
administrative updates.
So I always pull the agenda straight from the website, the one that was
Right.
posted. So at least the posted agenda didn't have that on it.
Gotcha.
But we will make room for administrative updates going forward as a practice to make sure that that's a part of the agenda.
As a practical matter, we got through to line 22 in the spreadsheet, and we started at line 14.
Mhm.
Just trying to figure out pacing.
Yeah, agreed. It's also, we are still, some of these questions and, we stick on process still sometimes, but we are getting faster
I'm just trying to figure out what the goal is for
for the 2 hours.
well, for next week and then for the
Yeah.
2 hours.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I think ideally we are actually done by the 22nd. So that might be aggressive. It also depends on, like where we're at right now in the middle of business becomes, it's like sort of the degree to which that is sort of controversial versus personnel versus, sort of students. Sort of there may be an inherent
Business was a bear when we did the cave stuff because
Right.
that's what just got into lots and lots of operational questions.
Right.
But if we're content to sort of punt on a lot of those, I think we'll be able to pick up the pace once we get through. And when we get to purchasing, we're just going to punt it.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Good.
You just have to let me know when you feel like Gwen would be useful. I think I said in an email that she is available the 22nd. I think I sent you an email, John and Sarah. I'm trying to remember what day.
Yeah, I think it was the 8th.
Oh, the 8th. And that might be too soon.
Too
It
early.
is. I think it
Yeah,
is.
I think maybe the 22nd makes the most sense. That's our
Right.
longer one.
All right.
Right.
Okay.
The absolute earliest.
Right.
We could, just to maximize the time or make the time efficient is maybe at the end, because we'll have presumably gone through a lot of the other policies we don't get to next week on the 22nd. And then we'll have our punch list to say, okay,
Right.
whatever the number of items are.
Right.
Correct. And
So
the
maybe
only
the
other
back
thing I
hour?
could think of to give us more time on the 8th is to start earlier if we couldn't do later. I don't know what everyone's flexibility is for that, but
I could start earlier than others.
I could start earlier.
I can
8 to
start
10 on the 15th.
Yeah.
Do
Or
that.
no, on the 8th. On
for
the
the
8th. I think.
8th.
I'm sorry, that's what.
Right.
Yeah.
Do we want to shoot for that?
So on April 8th, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. is the suggestion.
Yeah.
Correct.
I like that. That'll make it. We'll both be in special meeting then.
Mhm.
Yep.
But it
Okay.
gives us a 2 hours that morning and then again 2 hours on the 22nd, but instead from 9 to 11 on the 22nd.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
by 10 o'clock next week, we'll have a real good idea of
Yeah, we'll know
whether
how
the
far we
22nd
are.
is achieved.
Yep.
Correct.
Yep. Okay. Great. Love it.
So what's the target to review through for next week?
It
How
should
optimistic are we
be.
going to be?
It should be through student privacy, I'm sorry, no, that's not right. Through April 8th, it gets us down to physical activity.
What you have on that list. Okay.
Yep.
So line 61.
Yeah, we've been tracking that pacing, hope that holds.
Sarah and John, I have to drop. So I think.
Yeah, I do too.
Okay.
All right.
I
We have a
move we
motion.
adjourn the joint meeting.
Thank you,
Right.
Chris.
I move Region 9.
Okay,
Second.
we are adjourned at 10:07 for the joint.
Thank
you.
you.
All right,
John,
bye.
John, just a quick question. John and Chris.
Yep.